and engagement within the Office of International Programs at UNC Charlotte. Welcome. We're glad that you could join us for the International Career Panel Night, sponsored by the Office of International Programs at UNC Charlotte, the Magellan Society of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, and the University Career Center at UNC Charlotte. Tonight, we will start with a short workshop on working internationally, presented by Dr. Patrick Madsen, the Executive Director of the University Career Center here. The workshop will be followed by the International Career Panel at 6 p.m., moderated by Rachel Leidenheim, the Assistant Program Director of the Office of Intercultural and Educational Experiences, again within the Office of International Programs. Please remember that as an attendee, you will be muted and that we wish you to ask questions via the chat function. So the chat function, if you haven't used WebEx before, is that little bubble at the bottom of your screen or on the right. You should be able to find a little bubble for your chat questions. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible given the limited amount of time. We will also be sending out a short survey about the program. This is the first time we have offered this program online. Please fill out the survey and give us your feedback after you receive it tomorrow or the next day. And please keep your fingers crossed that the technology works. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Patrick Madsen.
All right, thank you, Joe. I'm waiting for the clapping of hands. So everybody just clap your hands at home, and I'll just imagine that we have a great audience out there. So we have a little bit of time together. We have about 30 minutes, give or take, before I turn it over to the great panel that you all will have next. So what I thought I'd do is spend about 10 to 12 minutes through a slide deck and just kind of walk you through some thoughts that I have and around working internationally. And then we'll spend the remainder time that we have together answering any questions that you have. Two things. One, as my colleague said, if you have any questions, go ahead and chat them in the chat box and I'll address them at the end, one at a time. And also this PowerPoint, at the end of this session, I'm going to give you my email address and you can email me to get this slide deck so you can review it later on. That way you're not scribbling through all this stuff and trying to write down as much as possible. I want you to soak in what we're talking about. And then if you have additional questions, even after this, you can, of course, email me if you have some different things. All right, so quickly, my experience, I am in my 21st year of working in career centers, 5th University here at UNC Charlotte. I have experience consulting overseas, so I have worked internationally. I've been through that type of process, and I've helped a number, if not hundreds of students at each university theorize and even make an action plan to work overseas. So a lot of this stuff comes from that. Now, the only caveat that I have is with this interesting pandemic that we're dealing with, things become a little bit more fluid. Things are a little different than what we might have experienced 5, 10 years ago, and even 2 years ago. So a lot of this will have some caveats around that. So, and I'll try to bring those out there. Okay, so as you're thinking about working internationally, here's what you need to be thinking about. The first thing is your brand, so you. And the way I like to describe this is, what are you trying to sell this employer? Where are you trying to go? And how is your image and your brand reflecting your interest and the skills and experience that you have to offer in additional countries or multinational corporations or even what we call NGOs, non-governmental organizations? Second thing you want to start thinking through is what's actually out there. So when I say what's out there, of course we have over 200 countries. So you have to start thinking through where would you want to target and where are your skills best aligned and what's the situation in these countries. And then more importantly, what organizations and companies exist. And those are always changing, and there's some large ones and small ones as well. And then I'm going to end with just a few resources that I've collected over the years that tend to or continue to be good for you to enhance your research, learn a little bit more, and really build this mentality of understanding the nuances to finding a job or even an internship overseas. Now, the way I talk with my international students who have come to this country and they're looking for internships and jobs is that, you know, it's going to take double the amount of work than your domestic counterparts to locate and land an internship and a job. For American citizens going overseas for jobs and internships, the same thing happens, meaning that if you decide you want to find a job or an internship in Spain or China or Russia or wherever it might be, expect that you're going to be spending double the amount of energy, double the amount of time in your career action plan and getting yourself out there. So in your brand, you have to start theorizing and thinking through what is it that you have to offer these companies? What is it that employers are looking for a lot of times? They're looking for skill sets. They're looking for language skills. So maybe you've spent some time learning Spanish, or you're learning Russian, or any number of other languages that are out there, and you've perfected that skill. That might help you understand what your targets should be, because that's something that puts employers at ease, meaning that you're not going to have as significant of a language barrier that you might in other places. Geographic flexibility. This is something that you are going to be able to show to an employer, that you can uproot yourself and go to a completely new country, a new society, a new culture, and get off of your feet pretty quick, meaning you can make your way around it. You can show them that you have the flexibility to learn new things and be able to deal with things that might be very new for you. You want to be able to show to them that you have the motivation to do this, and not just, hey, I'm looking for a vacation in South America, so I figure I'll do an internship down there. But there's a real career and personal motivation behind your interest in working in a particular country, a particular organization in that country. All the way down to upping your skill and your knowledge around global business practices. What is normal in American business practices might be different in other countries. And so being able to showcase that you've learned through some of those things, you've gained some experience, or you've gained some knowledge around that will help employers. Now, the challenges to employment, economic conditions. Not every country is doing well and versus others. So understanding the economic conditions in each country that you might be targeting is going to be on your job. Understanding the employment restrictions and even the cost to getting yourself out there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of resources that the Office of International Programs and the Career Office co-sponsor that will help you understand some of the visa processes and things, some of those technical areas to get you overseas. And like I said, the employers are very concerned around this whole motivation and the commitment on your side, and more importantly, the language barriers that you may or may not have. So when you're thinking about building your brand and marketing yourself, having an understanding of what employer worries might be and what it is that they're looking for will help you craft what it is that you're presenting to them on paper, online, and of course, in person and or virtually these days. So when you think about your marketing, your resume and your cover letter needs to be able to reflect your motivation, your interest, your commitment, and more importantly, the proof that you have some of these skill sets and experiences that they're looking for. Now, you can draw that from maybe you've done a study abroad while you're at the college or university that you're at. I highly recommend it. We have a fantastic study abroad program here at this university. Maybe you are a part of some of these international or global clubs and organizations on campus. Maybe you have taken courses in not just languages, but culture and society in other cultures or geographic areas. So these types of things you're going to want to bring out on your resume. You're going to want to be able to bring these out clearly in your LinkedIn profile. And then, of course, when you get to the interview round, when you get to whether it's a virtual interview or an in-person interview, these should be some of the things that you're going to be highlighting and helping them understand and what you have to offer that might be out there. So your marketing materials will need to be a targeted resume. So a lot of times I find from students is that they just have a general resume and they throw it out into the wind and they hope that somebody decides to want to interview them. It doesn't work like that anymore. And so as you start targeting different geographic areas, as you start targeting individual companies or organizations of interest, doing your research and understanding what it is that they do will help you tweak that resume to reflect, this is what I offer you and this is what I can actually do for you. Your online presence, LinkedIn is one of those top sites and has been for a number of years in which you'll be able to connect and network and find people, but also be able to reflect what it is that you have to offer. I say that with a resume, a lot of times you only have so much real estate to be able to describe who you are as a professional. Whereas LinkedIn, you can go into much more detail. You can connect yourself to international organizations, follow companies of interest internationally, and build that whole brand and visual and the image that's where you actually want to go. So building your brand and understanding what's your motivation for wanting to work internationally will help you figure out the target geographic area, the type of work that you're hoping to, and that will lead you into figuring out who's actually out there. And so your targets look like this. Of course, there are pure international companies that exist out there. So international companies, that might be a company in South Africa that only works in South Africa and has no international presence. That's the type of company that might be in this category. A multinational company might be ones like IBM or Johnson & Johnson, where they might have a headquarters in America, but they might have additional headquarters or branches around the world. And so there's an opportunity here for you to say, well, maybe I want to work for Johnson & Johnson, but be located in China. And so this is an opportunity for you to use those skills and that connection and find those types of organizations that exist in the country of your target that might have headquarters or branches in America. And then you have NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And these are things like the United Nations, for example, and some of those international focused types of organizations. And there are a number of them out there in many different types of sectors and many different types of areas of topic or area of focus. And so if you are thinking through that you want to work in the developing countries, working around issues dealing with water purification, or maybe you're looking at air purity, there's organizations that might be in that particular space that could use your particular types of skills. And I will even say that, for example, there's a great company that I've known for a while now called Chemonics, and they work in a number of different areas, and they could use somebody who is looking at data analytics for water purification, for example. So projects might come up from there. That's just an example. So knowing where you like to work. So Going Global, this is that product that I mentioned that Office of International Programs and the Career Center jointly fund, and we've been doing this every year for a number of years now. Great starting point to learn some ideas around organizations that might exist, resources on visa, and getting yourself out there. Uniworld is another one, American firms operating in foreign countries. You can see kind of how it looks, and they've updated their website a little bit since the last time I did this presentation. It's Going Global. Idealist is the best and the biggest nonprofit search engine that exists out there. And it's not just for America, but it's worldwide. And of course, there's jobs and internships that you can see there, and you can get it down to location. But I really like the organization list, because if you're thinking to yourself, I really love this type of topic, you can search organizations based on that and then start doing your networking and start understanding what opportunities might exist. And then lastly, to develop your target list of who you might want to apply for, remember, American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham. What I do is I will say, if I'm targeting, pick a country, Azerbaijan, I might put Azerbaijan, AmCham, to see if I can find an American Chamber of Commerce that works and operates in that particular country. It gives me an opportunity to see what are those multinational organizations that might exist in the target that I'm going after. A couple other things that you have out there, Transitions Abroad. It's a great website to help you with some organizations broken down by work and study and travel and things of that nature. And then University of Michigan has some really good additional resources that you might want to look at. When you're looking at NGOs, here's a couple websites that I recommend. Of course, the United Nations is out there. Peace Corps is, of course, at just about every university and college that's out there. They come to this university a couple times each year, and we have contacts there as well. And that's a reputable and well-known starting point. That's what might be out there. And then, like I said, LinkedIn is a perfect opportunity for you to, at the comforts of your home, especially during this time, start talking to people around their experience, and not just using it as a, hey, do you have an internship, but more about how did you find a job internationally? What is it that you know about your organization? What should I be expressing for this particular company that I'm going after? Getting that knowledge will help you build that brand that you are projecting that much better. Again, employers need to know what can you offer them and what's the connection between the experiences that you actually have and that they need. Some additional resources that are out there, DevX is one of my favorite all-time websites to peruse. It's around international development. They have job boards out there, career, but there's a lot of great reading resources, career spotlights, and then, of course, careers in global health and a number of other things that might be out there. DevX is definitely the main one that I would have you start for, because it gives you a sense of that whole cadre of opportunity for the skills and the experience that you might be able to leverage. And then finally, as I wrap up my talking points before I answer the questions in the chat bar, go ahead and throw your questions in the chat bar as I'm finishing up here. I want you to remember that there are certain things that you have to prepare ahead of time. So you going abroad, whether it's an internship or a full-time job, you have to start thinking through some of the operative aspects of it. One, visa and work permits. These things can take time. And understanding whether it's using Going Global or additional resources that we have, and of course the Office of International Programs, will help you understand the process that it takes to get a work visa in individual countries, any kind of fees, medical checks that they need, all the way down to any charges that you have. So I did some consulting work in Azerbaijan a number of years ago, and the process took 3 to 4 months for me to get permission just to do that consulting assignment there. And there was a number of notarized letters that I had to get from my counterparts over there to give proof, and I had to give my passport to the consulate here. So there's a lot of process that's involved sometimes, depending on where it is that you're trying to go. And there's also cost. So there are going to be a lot of companies that will probably pay for your flights and things of that nature, but you want to ask those questions as you're moving forward to make sure that you have an understanding of not just how to get there, but how much it's going to cost to live there, what kind of insurance you might need, understanding any types of furnishings that you might need to go find, all the living costs that sometimes we take for granted here when we're just finding a job in our own home country a lot of times. So mapping this out, having an action plan as you're starting to target an international work is going to help you prepare for some of these things. So your timeline means that you're going to have to prepare ahead of time. It's not one of those things where one day you can say, I want to work internationally and just boom, happen. It's going to be one of those things where you need to walk through your finances, walk through your targets, walk through what is it that you actually want to get out of this experience, and then designing that plan to go after the organizations that really interest you. Okay, I'm going to stop rambling from there, and let me jump into this chat box and see what kind of questions that we have. So the first one I have here is, what languages are most looked on for a resume? It depends. So it depends on the target that you want to go going towards. A lot of organizations that I have been seeing out there are, in general, in America, if you're looking at multinational, are Chinese, Mandarin, and Arabic. So those are some that have just come off quick in my mind. Spanish is very big, obviously, because there's a number of countries out there. But it goes back to what's your target in terms of working internationally. Where do you want to be? And that will dictate what skills you need to build. Next question, how are we able to target specific companies that are able to provide visas? Also, is there a better search company or search by job interest? There's a number of resources out there, and if you're a UNC Charlotte student, I would highly recommend you make an appointment with a career coach so we can go into a little bit more detail than what we have here. But that's where you start looking at if there's websites and whatnot for different countries that provide visas, but again, it's going to be a country by country sort of thing. How much time would you recommend preparing in advance before searching for international jobs with all the costs and processes involved? You know, I'm always of the opinion that if it's even in the back of my head at this point, why not have 2 action plans? One for jobs and internships in America, if you're American citizen and all that, and another one for a country that you're targeting, and do them at the same time. So that way you're using the same skill sets in terms of networking, building your resume, doing organizational searches, and pushing yourself out there. And then you can start to see what starts to pile in from the work that you're doing. Many times, and Joe, just yell at me if I'm going over time, okay? Many times for a company to supply you with a work visa, they must justify why they need you over a local person. What can one do to get a position despite that disadvantage? It's a good question. And I think the best what's in your control is being able to market and brand what it is that you have to offer and how it might be different than the local. And that's where you come into some of those, I'll call them intangibles of, language skills, being able to deal with different cultures, being able to think and act quickly on your feet in different situations and new nuances that you might come across, and even bridging business cultures. So if you're finding a job in China, then you have an understanding of how business is done in China. You have an understanding of how business is done in America. There's an interesting bridge that during your interview and hopefully maybe in a cover letter as well, you're able to demonstrate that and clearly show them the value add that you have for the organization. How do we market ourselves for NGOs if we do not have a degree in ONI, RI, internships, political science, economics, studies, psychology? It all depends on what they're looking for. So a lot of times you find with NGOs, they might have fellowships, they might have research analyst type of positions, and it goes down to, again, the topic or area of focus that you have an interest in and how you're connecting into that. So even as a psychology student, if you're a current student still, well, even if you're not, getting experience in research, getting experience in additional areas other than psychology, again, broadens out the value that you might have for NGOs. Great questions. I love this. Don't let me forget to put my email address in there as I'm reading questions. This is where you can get the slide deck from me. Just give me a quick email and just reference where I know you. And if you have questions, you can always email them to me as well, just in case we run out of time. How do they determine your level of language? Whew, that's a great question. There are some organizations that might have formal tests, or they might have an outside agency do it for you. It could be as simple as them asking you questions in their language to see how fluent you are. And when I was dealing with a couple of organizations, at the time my Spanish was maybe 75% fluency. It's less now because I haven't had time to practice. They asked me a series of questions purely in Spanish. They didn't slow up for me, and they wanted to see, generally speaking, was I really at that 75% or was I just saying that on my resume? So when you're demonstrating your level of expertise and fluency, you want to be very honest and so that they understand where you're at and how much additional training they could provide you just to get you up to a higher level of fluency. Would most employers provide housing or other aids in transitioning to working in another country? That is a question that you will want to ask them. So in your prior research, as you're building your target list of organizations, maybe some of that information will be readily available. As you're networking with professionals and those who might have currently or have worked at the organization in your target list, ask them those questions. And then more importantly and definitely during the interview, maybe in the second interview, if you will, as you start talking about a good match, ask them those questions. Ask them about the benefits that they have to offer. How do they transition you over there? Is there a 6-month housing, for example, or whatever it might be? Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask those during the negotiation so you have extreme clarity on what it is that you need to cover and what it's going to look like for them. Same thing goes with understanding any tax structures in that particular country. So, you know, the United Kingdom has a different tax level than we do here in America. So understanding where your money's going to and any types of taxes you might have to pay in that country versus in your home country. So a lot of these nuances, that's why having a strong action plan will be important. Okay, final question, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Joe, because I know there's some awesome panelists that are itching to go and talk about their experiences. How long is the job hiring process for most of these organizations? It could be anywhere from 1-2 months long to up towards a year, depending on how it is that they process and the level of background checks and things that they might have to go through. All right, I am impressed with the questions that I got, and I'm so glad to be here with you all. You have my email address in the chat box. Please write it down. Do not hesitate to give me a quick email for the slide deck or if you have questions. Joe, I'm turning it back over to you for a transition.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Thanks so much. And I would be happy to send out the email to everybody as well. I mean, your slideshow as well. If you want to send that to me, that's fine. So we'll be happy to do that as well.
Perfect, either way.
All right, thank you again. And I think, if I am correct, we have all of our panelists online. Give us a few seconds, a couple of minutes, and then we'll start with the next part of the program, because we know there will be some other attendees who are going to log in. So Patrick, if you can unshare the screen, I'm still seeing your screen there, that would be great. Let's see.
Go ahead and change my settings from presenter and all that, and it should take it away.
All right, okay. Get that right now.
So I'm going to try it another way to see if I can speed it up.
We got plenty of time, so no problem. I just talked to Elizabeth too, and she's the host, so she will change your settings in just a second. All right. Okay. All right, can you all see me during this time? This is definitely a transition. Thank you, Megan, for sending a chat saying hello. We're glad that everyone could attend, and that's why we're holding off for a few more minutes because we know a lot of people are going to join right now. Just so you know that we will, oh, you can't see me. Great. All right, wonderful. Just so you know, we will have questions and answer period for the panelists. And so please be sure that you use the chat function to submit your questions. And I'm going to introduce Rachel Ladenheim right now. Rachel, if you want to unmute yourself and also possibly put up your video, I will go ahead and start introducing you since we ended a little earlier on the last section. So Rachel Ladenheim is going to be our moderator tonight. Rachel Ladenheim is the Assistant Program Director of the Office of Intercultural Education Experiences within the Office of International Programs. And so again, attendees, you will be muted during this time. And again, we wish that you ask questions via the chat function. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible within the next hour. We will also be sending out a short survey for those who just joined us about the program tomorrow. And this is the first time we've offered this program online. So please fill out the survey and give us your feedback, as well as keep your fingers crossed that the technology works. So far, so good, knock on wood. All right, Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Can you hear me, Joe?
Yes.
Perfect, and hopefully you can see my video. It's on my end. If you can, that might be my internet, but hopefully it's live. So thank you again, Joe, for that introduction. I work with Joe in the Office of International Programs at UNC Charlotte, and thank you to everyone that has tuned in this evening for our annual International Career Panel. I'm going to very quickly introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to them so that they can provide some more details. So to get us started, we have Kathryn Crockart on here today. She is the Mid-Atlantic Diplomat in Residence at the U.S. Department of State. We have Dillon Clausner, who is an International Student and Scholar Advisor, also within the Office of International Programs at UNC Charlotte. We have Whitney Kamerzel, who is an Associate at Womble, Dickinson. And then Chris Domeny, who is a Vice President in Global Technology at Bank of America, as well as the Honorary Consul of Hungary. So, Kathryn, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to turn it over to you first, if you could take a few moments to introduce yourself in a little bit more detail.
Sure, absolutely, Rachel. Thank you. And hello to everyone this evening. I wish I could be there with all of you in person, but I'm glad that we have this technology to connect us in the meantime. I have been a diplomat with the State Department for the last 21 years. I've served six countries overseas, 7 overseas assignments, and I'll be departing for my 8th overseas assignment, fingers crossed, in a couple of months' time. So it's been an amazing career. In my current role as diplomat in residence, I'm a recruiter, so looking for that next generation of American diplomats, both in our traditional diplomatic work like political skills, public relations, but also in very specialized skill sets like IT and engineering. So there really is a diplomatic career out there for everyone, and I hope that all of you here tonight are interested in some of the opportunities we have to offer.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. I'm going to turn it over to Dillon now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dillon Clausner, and I actually work at UNC Charlotte currently, where I advise international students and scholars on visa and immigration-related benefits and questions to help them navigate their time here in the United States. I started my international career as a Peace Corps volunteer. Upon graduation from undergrad, I served in Cambodia for 2 years as an education volunteer. I then went to grad school, worked at UCLA, doing something similar to what I'm doing now, and now I'm here at UNC Charlotte. I'm happy to hear from you all and answer any questions you might have about the kind of work that I do in education and international education.
Thank you, Dillon. All right, I'll turn it over to Whitney.
Hey everyone, I'm Whitney Kamerzel. I work at Womble Dickinson as an international attorney. We basically help domestic companies and international companies resolve their disputes. My background is in international human rights law, so I worked in Cambodia and Phnom Penh on international human rights cases that dealt with indigenous people, child labor, and there were some other issues involved. Prior to that, I worked called the Rule of Law Collaborative, and our goal was to promote the rule of law abroad, and that basically we would train Department of Defense and Department of State personnel on the different initiatives that are ongoing internationally.
All right, appreciate that, Whitney. Okay, last but certainly not least, Chris, you could share a little bit more about what you do in your country.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. Yeah, I'm Chris Domeny. I'm originally from Germany, with parents from Hungary and Poland, so I'm throughout European. I'm doing my primary education in Europe, but my secondary education, my undergraduate and my graduate degree is actually in the US as an international student back then. I've worked in small business in Europe, in Hungary, and in Germany for quite some time. The German States Agency for Economic Affairs out of a New York office, so I've had some experience with economic development and direct investment. And lastly, for a larger corporation, Bank of America, where I've been for about 12 years in the business technology. And since about 6 years almost, I've been representing the Republic of Hungary and North Carolina and South Carolina.
Thank you, Chris. As you can all hear, not so much see, we have a very diverse group of panelists with a lot of really great experience. I know they're excited to share that with all of you. So as Joe said, there's going to be a chance for you all to have questions at the panelists first, but feel free to start putting your questions in the chat box. As soon as we wrap our questions up, I'll go ahead and start asking the panelists those questions. All right, so Kathryn, if you can get us started, what international careers exist within the U.S. government, and what's the process for becoming an FSO?
Okay, a two-part question. I always like to kick things off with a two-parter. We have a lot of international opportunities across the federal government. My expertise is obviously with the State Department, and so that's what I'm best prepared to talk to you all about tonight. But the Foreign Service is actually a multi-agency kind of career. So there are foreign service opportunities in the Foreign Commercial Service. There's a Foreign Agricultural Service. There are a number of different ways to serve overseas with the government. But the State Department is the leading foreign affairs agency, and when you think about who staffs embassies and consulates around the world, you're primarily thinking about State Department FSOs and foreign service specialists. And the second part of your question, which specific types of careers, is a really important one, because I think unless you've really worked or interned in an embassy, people don't realize what breadth of variety we have. And so as I mentioned earlier, we have our generalist careers. So when people think about the Hollywood idea of a diplomat, they're usually thinking about a foreign service officer. So that's the political and economic analysts who are delivering our foreign policy to our foreign partners around the world and trying to build consensus around issues of U.S. national interest. And then our public diplomacy officers, so that's the communications wing of what we do. If you have a journalism or PR background, if you love cultural relationships, public diplomacy might be right for you. We have managers who are the chief operating officers of these operations around the world. So think about, billion-dollar embassy operations, very diverse workforces, all kinds of IT and infrastructure and security issues. Our managers deal with those. We have consular officers who handle all of our visa and passport services, who right now are working literally insane hours repatriating tens of thousands of Americans back to the U.S. from around the world due to the public health crisis. Those are what the consular officers do, real unsung heroes of our diplomatic corps. And then we have specialists. We hire our specialists for the skills that they bring into the Foreign Service from beforehand. So we look for IT professionals. If you all are computer science majors, IT majors, systems engineers, we need you. This is a critical area of need for us. We need healthcare providers, nurse practitioners, doctors, psychiatrists. We need construction engineers who design and build our embassies. And then we have other specialists from security specialists all the way to kind of administrative and clerical specialists and beyond. So there are lots of different ways to take the skills that you already have and apply those globally. It's a pretty dynamic place to work.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathryn, for all of that information. Dillon, you're up next. How has intercultural communication been a part of your professional experiences, from the Peace Corps to higher education? Can you speak on the importance of foreign language skills?
Yeah, so, personally for me, intercultural communication, including foreign language skills and learning, has played out two main ways in my career. The first way is that there's, the direct benefit of being able to communicate with, people in other languages. As a Peace Corps volunteer, in my community in Cambodia, there were many, many people who either didn't have the opportunity to learn English or it wasn't, widely known there. And so in order to communicate with them and to, be a successful Peace Corps volunteer, I had to learn the local language. And so, yeah, you do get, when you know another language, you can communicate with people on the ground in ways that'll lead you to be more successful. And then beyond the just, immediate value of being able to communicate in a local language, there's also the importance of perspective. As Charlemagne said, to have a second language is to have a second soul. And I feel like that's really helped me in my job here in the United States, welcoming international students and scholars, helping them navigate complex situations. Just knowing another language, because I've struggled and stumbled over words, and maybe it was a lot. It took a lot of patience for me to try and learn different languages and get to that point. I feel like I have more empathy and perspective for the students and scholars who are coming into the United States for a lot of the struggles that they deal with. And so I think it's really been, very helpful to have foreign language skills. I would say that, it doesn't, for something like Peace Corps, it doesn't really matter which language you learn before you go into something like Peace Corps. They just want to see that you have that experience learning a language. And so learning a language when you're in high school or you're in college is really important, because you have to be able to pass the intensive language training and exams that you have when you have something like Peace Corps. And I would say probably for most international, development kind of related jobs, knowing at least one other language is kind of a basic prerequisite.
Thank you, Dillon. How can someone get started in human rights or international law? Can you discuss your personal volunteer work and other opportunities for how to volunteer on global issues? We've got another two-parter.
Sure. Yeah. So whether you want to work in international law or human rights law specifically, I think the biggest key is to get international experience. A lot of people are going to be looking for experience doing field work or even just living abroad. And so I always knew that I wanted to have some sort of an international career. I think it took some time for me to realize that I wanted it to be human rights law focused and international business focused. But I was always looking for those opportunities to spend time and to live abroad. And so a lot of people that I mentor like to say, well, what can I do that, if you need this experience, how do you first get your foot in the door to go do it? And, if it's an unpaid opportunity, colleges are, obviously aren't the most rich people out there. And so what kind of opportunities can you find that aren't going to cost you a ton of money, aren't going to cost you thousands of dollars to go, buy a hotel or, to live in a hotel for months over the summer? And so you can do mission trips. And I think that was kind of what originally opened the door for me. I worked in Haiti when I was an undergrad, and that was the first opportunity that I had to work with children and to work with human rights issues, and to live in a different country for a little while. And so I did that through my local church. And so then after I did that, I was kind of turned on to this whole international career into human rights, and learned that I wanted to go to law school. And I had thought really hard about Peace Corps, and I think that's fantastic, Dillon, that you served in Cambodia. And I would highly recommend that to anybody who's looking for an international career, because it's such a fantastic opportunity to spend 2 years abroad. And you're not paying for living. I think they give you a stipend, and they also give you educational opportunities in the form of a fellowship upon return. So, if you're thinking about a graduate degree afterwards, then I think Peace Corps can be a fantastic volunteer opportunity that gives you that international experience abroad. But other than that, I think just keeping your eyes open for international opportunities is the biggest thing, the biggest favor that you can do for yourself. Even if it's just, picking up and moving for a summer, whether it's with your family or with a friend, even if it's just for a few weeks, to go spend time abroad and get that experience in a different culture, maybe with a different language, and kind of learn what you're interested in while you're abroad. And I think that will always give you something that you can talk about in interviews, in college applications, or graduate applications, but even just, with colleagues in the future. But, I always just looked for those international opportunities. And I think that's something that you guys can all do to really give yourself a good foot in the door, and then experiences to write about on applications and your resumes for the future.
Thank you for the tip, Whitney. All right, Chris, what is it like working to support foreign direct investment? And then how do large organizations such as Bank of America operate around the world, and what's the best way to get a foot in the door?
Well, I can tell you how it was like working to support foreign direct investment, because currently there's not much going on, and it'll take some time for that to recover. I'll answer that part from the vantage point as my duties as an honorary consul. I've been doing quite a bit of that and wear that role. But foreign direct investment, to just really explain what that really is, basically the attraction of business from one part of the world or a region to another one. And you have several actors in that value chain. Right? You have the business itself that's interested to expand into a new market. Then you have the regions, whether that's a country or a state or even a city that's interested in basically having that business. And then you have a bunch of intermediaries. That includes government, includes consultants, includes all sorts of companies that want to facilitate that movement, including attorneys, accountants, and whatnot. I've kind of observed all this from a higher level view, where I was able to get in touch, or sometimes company owners would find me either through the embassy or me directly, because I happen to be in a region where that is of their interest, and then was able to facilitate first contacts and allowing them to figure out or get to know more about the region, whether it's a fit, finding certain resources for them if they needed to know a bit more detail, then an attorney would maybe come into play, or real estate investment person and whatnot. And all the way down to maybe even figuring out how to acquire clients. So it's quite interesting, because at least from the position where I sit, it's very diverse. It's industry agnostic. I've spoken with tech startup CEOs and executives from really mature companies and established industries. And the needs are completely unique and different. I'm kind of all over the place. Through the consulate, we do a certain level of activity for free, basically. So the Hungarian government doesn't really charge for that. It's part of the economic attaché office. And then there were a few occasions where these companies actually needed a bit more help, where they decided that this would perhaps be the region where they want to settle. And then it becomes, it starts usually with a representative. Even to get that started, you would need a local resource to help figure things out, the legal aspect, how to even register the entity and whatnot. Sometimes I would help in these scenarios. Sometimes I would refer them to people that do that for me. But by and large, I would say what you really start to understand is how the value chain really works, what incentives there are at play, what's important to a company, what's important to a region in order to grow and prosper. Because the more business a region or a city will bring in, the more tax revenue it will create, and the more prosperous that region will become, or natural. So a very fascinating space. I kind of stumbled into it a little bit. I did work for the German state agency for just under a year, where I did this work as a project manager, which was very narrow in scope. We basically had to identify US companies that were ready to go to Bavaria in Germany. Then basically connect the dots and help them figure out with each department what joint ventures to create. You really do get, so your network more or less explodes in that aspect. This is one big takeaway, I think, when you deal in that kind of space. These contacts, they kind of stay around. And the longer you deal with this, the broader your network becomes, the more you can leverage it. So, very interesting. Your second question, how large organizations like Bank of America operate and how to get in, highly depends on the company itself. Multinational companies, there are quite a few of them in various industries. Depends on their supply chain, how vertical they are. If they have a product to sell and they're large enough, you pretty much see them in on every continent, I'm sure, and in many established countries. The banking sector, my personal opinion would probably not be the first one I would think of. There are a few exceptions in finance. I'm thinking of Citi, American Express, where they do have more of an international presence. Bank of America has one through Merrill Lynch, but this is very targeted, and the subsidiaries are quite small and focused, based mostly on wealth management and the corporate side. So an international experience or post through Bank of America is probably a bit more difficult compared to companies like Netflix, Intel, GE, these kinds of companies. To get into those, I think my personal experience, network. So coming from Europe, I have to say I grossly undervalued the value of networking and of one's network. In Europe, that's just simply not approached the same way as it is here in the US. So I had to catch up. And doing my graduate studies, it really dawned on me. And that's where I kind of saw how to do it and what the benefits are. And ultimately, I think that's what ends up getting you a job in the US too. You have your traditional, avenues through HR and the job board online, but if you really look at it, I think 70% of something is really staffed through connections where you may get a heads up or you have a warm introduction. And that held true for me. That's how I got my job at the bank. And I've heard many similar stories.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. All right, I have 3 questions. They're general questions for any panelist that would like to. Panelists, if you can try doing the hand raise, so I know if you'd like to answer it. I'll go ahead and get started with the first question. This is more general. What professional skills should job seekers look to develop or strengthen in order to be competitive in the international job market? All right, Kathryn, thanks so much. Take it away.
I'll start that one. For the State Department, if you're interested in specialist careers in the Foreign Service, we are looking for the hard technical skills, like I mentioned before. But if you're interested in being a Foreign Service officer, the skills you'll want to hone right now have a lot to do with the soft skills. So we hire based on what we call 13 dimensions of your character. And these are things like your leadership skills, your interpersonal skills, intercultural skills, your ability to analyze information, your ability to communicate, both in writing and orally. So those kinds of things are skill sets that you can develop in any opportunity that you have, whether you're, interning at the local animal shelter or whether you are working, in the C-suite of a Fortune 500 company, you can demonstrate those kinds of characteristics and deepen those skills. And so we define these 13 dimensions. You can look them up on our website. But those are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about in any job that you're doing if the State Department is a goal for you in the future. And realize that all opportunities can help you develop these skills. Don't let something that's right in front of you pass you by, looking for some, magical secret sauce that you think is going to help you get into the State Department. We do have lots of people who bring really maybe surprising backgrounds into the Department of State. Some of you at UNC Charlotte may have heard one of my favorite anecdotes before, but it's from a candidate who came into the State Department about a year ago from a job as a barista at Starbucks, which is not necessarily the kind of career that most people would think would line you up for becoming a diplomat. But when she was hired, she was asked a question about kind of crisis management, and without skipping a beat, she said, "Every morning at 8 a.m. is a crisis at my place of work." And immediately, I can see my fellow panelists smiling, but immediately everyone in the room knew exactly what she was talking about. And we can all imagine it too. And then she started to explain what it was that she personally did behind that counter to calm down the late, under-caffeinated, overworked people in the line waiting for their cup of joe in the morning. And that was a skill that everyone could see her then applying in some kind of diplomatic crisis. So really don't dismiss the opportunity that you're in right now. Use that to develop these skill sets, and those will be the ones that get you hired by the State Department in the future.
Thanks, Kathryn. It looks like Chris also would like to respond.
Yeah, just quickly, I second everything that Kathryn has mentioned. Absolutely, especially intercultural stuff. I maybe just wanted to add two little things. Relationship management in general, I think, is key. But also a note that relationships are really built through small talk and all the personal experience that you have with someone, these off-topic conversations. And in an international setting, to have a general understanding and awareness of geopolitics, the world map, it's not a joke, but if things or conversations come up, you would want to know where things are, what relationships there may be between or among some countries. You don't have to be an expert, but to at least show that you have a general interest in that will separate you from everyone else in that sense.
All right, thanks, Chris. Our next question is actually something that Chris has already alluded to, but maybe some of the other panelists want to chime in as well. What are the benefits of networking, and how can job seekers establish relationships with people or employers who may not live in the same country?
I can speak to it. Someone else can chime in as well, but I think people get so scared at the word networking, and it gives them this anxiety because it can seem sort of overwhelming that, the opportunities that you'll have in the future may depend on who you network with. So I think it's important to remember that networking can be things like talking to your professors now and building relationships with your professors who may, teach in areas that you eventually would like to practice, and staying in touch with them. And not only professors, but, joining organizations like, say, the WACC, the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, or the Young Professionals the Magellan Society. I think just meeting people and joining different organizations in the areas that you're interested in, it just, go to those events and then take one or two names down, start, spreading your name around, and then maybe send somebody an email afterwards. And you might just develop a friendship there, and you'll find that networking can be as easy as just, showing up to an event, making a friend, and then just shooting them an email and saying, hey, you want to go grab coffee? I'd love to hear more about what you do. And then just following up on those relationships. I think it really is just becoming a yes person. And so, you might be really tired on a Monday and your work might say, hey, we have this event. We need to fill 5 spots at the dinner table. It's this, it's a philanthropy event or something like that. Would you be interested in going? And you might be, really tired. You had classes all day, or maybe you just, you worked all day. But just remembering to say yes to some of those opportunities, because you never know what can come out of that. And you never know what relationships you'll take with you that you can, eventually turn into either a friendship or someone that you can keep in touch with to kind of develop your network.
Thanks, Whitney. Chris, did you want to add something as well?
Yeah, Whitney really nailed it. I would probably try to summarize it this way. If you're on an international scene, if you're an American, I think you're already ahead of everyone else. That's just because Americans kind of have the sense of networking built into them. I had to learn how to make it a philosophy rather than something I have to do. So it just becomes something of you, right? And how to engage with strangers or people in a room is something that Americans just simply excel at when I compare them with people from other countries. Just to keep that up, right? And basically funnel, your interest, through that, and stick with it, basically. But I would also urge, so how to establish relationships with people in other countries. If you have the luxury, if you are free, so you don't have family or kids, and you have some disposable income, take a few $100s, buy a plane ticket, and go and fly to that country that is of interest or where that company may be headquartered and spend a weekend there. Today, that's actually possible. In off season, these flights aren't even that expensive. Our parents would have thought this idea is ludicrous, but today it's very realistic. And make a long weekend out of it and actually touch and feel. And you will be amazed at how much that opens up your world, and you build on that.
I appreciate the contributions. One final question that I have. Based on your experiences, would you find it more beneficial to attend graduate school before beginning your career or return after gaining some practical experience? Dillon.
Yeah, so I haven't worked in admissions, but I do work in education. And I would say, personally, I would recommend going to graduate school after gaining some practical experience. I think, it makes you a stronger candidate. After joining the Peace Corps, in my specific case, I got into every program that I applied to. And as Whitney mentioned earlier, there were fellowship and funding opportunities because I was in the Peace Corps and had some work experience. Once you're actually in graduate school, I think having some work experience allows you to contribute to academia in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you were just coming straight from undergrad. Even in a year or two, you can gain a lot of knowledge about how the world actually works. And that can be really beneficial in graduate school, especially with something like writing a thesis that's based in practice or something like that. I also think, in my particular program, we had students who were coming straight from undergrad who were, they lingered with their thesis or that they dropped out altogether. I feel that, the burnout from actually going straight from undergrad to graduate school can be a real thing for some. And I also think that even if you're doing relatively low paid work, like something like Peace Corps, during that time before you go to grad school, you're much more likely, even still, despite that, to be in a good financial position to be a graduate student, which in a lot of cases means you're more of a pre-professional. You can afford to go to conferences and maybe make internship or work experience decisions that aren't based on money because, you know, you might have a student loan or something like that. I feel like it makes you a little bit more free to just focus on your professional and academic interests like that.
Thanks, Dillon. Looks like Chris, you have your hand raised, and Kathryn as well. Chris, go ahead first.
Yeah, I would second that. I would, regarding the business degree, right? So an MBA, basically. I would maybe just add that it can be also a very costly mistake to rush into an MBA because these things cost a lot of money unless you get scholarship. And then you're kind of forced into a decision afterwards to try to find a high-paying job. And maybe you never intend to go and join a big corporate company, but maybe you are more the type that wants to open up an international business. There are many different ways to do it, or maybe join a startup who generally don't really need someone with an MBA degree because two things. One, they're very expensive, and two, you are really learning some fundamentals that make you much more risk averse. And you start to approach things differently afterwards. I mean, that's the whole intent of the education, right? You get a formal education, but in some instances it can actually backfire, and you are narrowing your scope. So to avoid that, the additional experience, just life experience in general, and even seeing how things really work before going into that, is probably a key.
So I'll just add very briefly, for those of you who are interested in becoming a Foreign Service Officer, please do not go to graduate school just because you think you need that master's degree in order to be hired by the Department of State. And that is not a credential we require. And although there are lots of FSOs who have master's degrees and a good number with PhDs, there are also a very large number, like me, who just have a bachelor's degree. We hire on the basis of those 13 dimensions, not on the basis of your GPA or what degree you've achieved. That said, if you really want to further your studies, and this is something that matters to you personally, regardless of what's ahead of you for your career, go and study what you want, what you love, what will be fulfilling to you. The State Department does have a student loan repayment program, so that might be of interest to some of you at the undergraduate level or considering grad school. We will pay up to $10,000 a year and a lifetime maximum of $60,000 off your student loans for qualifying service. And then for State Department officers, regardless of their educational background, who want to pursue academic credentials while they're in service at the State Department, that is absolutely possible at the mid-career level. So between 8 and 15 years in as an FSO, you can go and get your Master's in National Strategic Studies at one of our war colleges, which are accredited institutions managed by the Department of Defense. Amazing opportunities to think, just really think for a year, take some time away from the normal typical duties and to work together with members of the intelligence community and our Department of Defense, thinking about what's right for America in the future. We send people every year to Princeton for Masters in Public Policy. We have non-degree fellows at places like Stanford and Tufts and the University of Southern California. So there are lots of ways within the State Department to further your education as well.
Whitney, did you want to chime in on that question as well?
I think they covered that.
Not a problem. Well, we do have lots of questions in the chat box. I'll just start with hopefully the first one here. The first question is there a wide breadth of international opportunities for new grads, or are the majority of international positions only available to professionals with many years of experience? Okay, thanks. Chris wants to take this one.
Yeah, I can start. So I guess it really depends on the company, how young it is, how agile it is, how risk tolerant it is. But all else equal, you do have to understand the less work experience you have, the potentially the higher the risk, you would have to be trained to send someone overseas or abroad. Is usually something more significant, unless it's maybe a limited time, like a few weeks. Some companies actually take new hires and send them abroad on purpose just for them to gain understanding how the company works internally, but they're not meant to work there. It's not a long-term placement. So all else equal, yes, you will compete with people that have been around for a bit longer, have more relevant work experience. So somewhere you have to make up for that. Either you have some specific skill sets or particular to that setting or environment or country, you have an asset that others don't, maybe understanding of the culture or the language, previous experience. When we were in Europe and we were looking for jobs, we were in Hungary at that time. My wife and I, we both had undergrad degrees. We were looking for, we wanted to leave Hungary, and we looked at Germany and the US and applied from Hungary, and nothing happened. And we realized the level where we are and what we can offer, we just have to be local. And we just bought 2 plane tickets and flew to New York and ended up getting our jobs there locally. That's my personal experience. Obviously, that's just one voice.
All right, I think Kathryn also raised her hand to answer that.
Yeah, just briefly, I already mentioned that, no specific degree is required. I think if you've looked into the State Department before, there's an often quoted statistic, which is true, that our average new FSO tends to be in their early 30s, somewhere between 32 and 34. It kind of varies depending on the orientation class demographics. But that's because the average person who takes our Foreign Service Officer test, that first step in becoming a diplomat, the average test taker is also in their early 30s. So we hire from the age of 21 all the way up to the age of 59. And that type of breadth of diversity is part of the larger diversity and inclusion that you experience when you work at the Department of State. So we want people in their 20s. We want people in their 50s. All of those kinds of perspectives contribute to strong foreign policy. The key thing for us is to be in the process, be applying for opportunities. On the specialist side, there are certain specific specialties where you can apply straight out of school. The biggest and most obvious one is our IT specialist track. So again, if you have that computer science background, we will hire you with an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree and no work experience. The other thing for people who have qualified language skills, I heard there was a language question at the end of the last session. We have a program called the Consular Fellows Program, where your language skill is your foot in the door. And the languages we hire for that program are Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, and Portuguese. So if you would consider yourself fluent in one of those 4 languages, you have multiple things that you can apply for at the Department of State that don't require lots of work experience or advanced degrees.
Okay, this next question is for Dillon. What types of graduate degrees or internships best prepare someone to be an advisor for international students in higher education, and how did you navigate to your current position?
Oh my gosh, I'll start with that first part. For graduate degrees, some people do get a Master's of Education, MED. There are concentrations such as an MED in Higher Education Administration. You can go that route. I don't think it's necessarily necessary to. It's not necessary to have that in order to get the kind of job that I have or an advisor in type position at a university around the country. I think one thing that is really, really useful if you are looking to advise international students within the United States is to work at an international office as a student worker. Our student workers go on to have careers in immigration law, or they become advisors on the university side. That is a really, really common path. So if you are a student now and you are interested in going that route, I would highly recommend actually, just get involved with your International Student and Scholar Office and, see if they need student workers. Maybe they need volunteers for events. The closer you can get to that office, the more experience you can get with that. And then my personal path is really quite roundabout. I went from Peace Corps to graduate school, and then I just happened to apply for a job at UCLA that related to, welcoming actually Department of State J1 exchange visitors to UCLA. They have a really big population. They have around 3,000 exchange visitors, which that's a program of the Department of State where people from other countries come to universities and share their skills and then go back and share those skills. So that's kind of how I got there, learning the regulations to help advise them, and then recently moved to UNC Charlotte.
Thanks, Dillon. All right. Would any of you recommend working for international NGOs within the U.S. first in order to gain more experience and connections in that sector before going abroad?
So if that's what it takes, you can be applying to those international NGO positions, but, a lot of times they're going to be looking at, have you lived abroad? Have you volunteered? Have you worked abroad? And so if you, find yourself applying to a lot of international NGO positions and, maybe you're not hearing back from the UN or, or from other international NGOs that you've tried to work with, then yeah, I definitely recommend looking local and trying to find an NGO that does, something similar. It may not be identical, but something similar that you can do right here at home so that at least, even if it's a hobby, even if it's not a full-time job, that you can be, furthering your experience and furthering, your expertise in that area so that the next time you see this international NGO position that pops up in an area you're interested in, you can say, hey, I've been working with immigrants here. We've been doing X, Y, Z. Or, I've confronted human rights right here in our backyard, and that's really what I want to do internationally, and here's what I've done. And so if you can't skip, hop, jump right to that international job, then yeah, definitely look for those opportunities as they arise just right here at home.
Okay, this next one I think is maybe for Kathryn. I am not a U.S. citizen, but I am bilingual and have grown up in two cultures, Native and U.S. I feel that I may be able to bring that background and contribute to an organization like the State Department or an NGO. What would your advice be for a case like mine?
So on the NGO side, as long as you have the authority to work in the United States, I think that kind of international background would be considered highly desirable. A lot of the NGOs that work with the State Department in the areas I'm most familiar with, for example, our cultural diplomacy, have very international workforces. So the NGO sector is definitely a place that you should look if you have the authority or the ability to stay and work here. As far as the State Department goes, our foreign service opportunities are all limited to U.S. citizens only as a result of our security clearance requirements. So if you are on the path to citizenship, if that's something that is in your future, please put us on hold. And once you have that naturalization certificate in hand, start the application process. A number of my most talented colleagues, that will come as no surprise to you, are naturalized American citizens, people who have literally lived the American dream in very compelling ways and then are going out and being the face of that reality all around the world. And so please keep us in mind for the future. If you are interested in moving back overseas and working in your home country or any other country where you have the legal authority to work, you can also apply for what we call our locally employed staff positions. Those positions are advertised through each specific embassy's webpage. And overseas, we hire lots and lots of international citizens to work for our embassies, but that's all handled at the specific embassy level. And you would have to have pre-existing work authorization in order to be eligible for those jobs. So the country of your citizenship, most likely.
Okay, Dillon, this one's for you as well. Are there opportunities for people to work in higher education in other countries? And then you kind of already answered this, but does the master's degree have to be specific in international studies, political science, or economics if you wanted to work in an international sector?
To answer the first part of the question, if you're talking about working in administration at a university abroad, it can be difficult. I don't think it's very common. I don't know so much about it, but I think that a lot of those positions are reserved for nationals, or it's just very difficult to get work authorization to work in administration. Like if you wanted to go to, like, you know, work at Cambridge in England, I think that would be pretty difficult to get in terms of administration. But if you are interested in pursuing teaching, for example, my background is in education. My undergrad major was actually in English, and I think, you know, as long as you tailor your skills, like, can you teach? Do you have experience tutoring students? Things like that, you know, yeah, it doesn't matter then as much, like other panelists have said, about what your major is. It matters more about what are you trying to do, what skills have you already built up maybe in the United States, and that can kind of make a bridge for you to get abroad and be able to do that abroad. So yeah, I think there's a lot of teaching opportunities abroad. Those range from being you know, teaching at a university to maybe possibly teaching English at a university, or teaching with a program like JET, which is where Americans go and teach English in Japan. I think those are all possibilities. But for administration, I think it's pretty limited.
Thank you, Dillon. All right, so I like our next question here. I have somewhat limited mobility due to a physical disability. In light of that, how feasible is it to land internships abroad during grad school or after? How do I present myself as an asset to an international employer if that could be seen as a limitation? Kathryn, thank you.
Yes, me. Okay, so I love this question. And I don't get this question often enough, so whoever asked it, thank you so much. I don't know whether you're familiar with Schedule A hiring authorities with the federal government, but the U.S. government has basically a fast track to employment for people with qualifying disabilities. And what that means is once you're in our database for Schedule A, you have access to an enormous range of jobs that are not advertised to the general public. And this allows us to hire people much more quickly and to look at a much more refined applicant pool than when we're getting 10,000 applications for one position. And so this is something that for our civil service positions, these are the domestically based jobs. For us, it's mostly in Washington, although other parts of the federal government are scattered throughout the Carolinas and all over the country. But for full-time civil service employment, we hire a large proportion of our subject matter experts from Schedule A list. And then on internships, you should absolutely look at the State Department's internship program. We have virtual internships that you can do if you're a student that you can do during the academic year. It's called the Virtual Student Federal Service. And the application window for that program is in July. So July 1st through July 31st, and then the internship will be in the coming academic year. So you can intern for an embassy all around the world. You can intern for an office in Washington. When I served at our embassy in Pakistan, we used virtual interns all the time because we couldn't have interns in Islamabad with us due to security considerations. So that's a way to get some international experience without leaving home. You could also serve at the State Department in Washington, D.C. as an in-person intern. And depending on what sort of accommodations you need, there may also be some international opportunities that are available to you as an intern. So please do not count yourself out. We need your skills and we need your talent, and so apply.
I lived abroad many years ago. While I have traveled on vacation internationally since then, would I need a more recent stint to be considered a competitive candidate?
I can chime in, maybe.
Thank you, Chris.
My personal opinion, I think by now, it would probably depend what kind of vacation, but by and large, they have become more and more, common, I would say. And there are quite a few people out there that already have work experience to some limited degree in other countries. So the competition pool is getting more and more intense. So just because I went on vacation to some countries, it's probably not a big pull anymore. So there would have to be other skill sets or something else that separates you from everyone else in order to pursue an international career.
Yeah, I would play up that you did originally live abroad, though. I think that is a great asset. We have other lawyers in my firm that grew up in Germany and grew up in other places around the world, and I think they do a great job at announcing that in different cases or different things or different people that we're talking to, and I think it helps them build relationships. So even if you grew up or spent 10 years in a different country and that's when you lived abroad, I would play that up. If that's what you've got, then that's what you got to play up. Yeah, but if you do have the opportunity to travel now, I think, well, currently it's a little difficult with COVID, but I think afterwards, yeah, I think that may make you more competitive. And then one last tip, something that one of my international professors told me in law school was, I was going abroad with my father to go travel to South Africa, and she said, go find some people go find an organization to volunteer with for the day, or go find some people to network with so that you can, eventually pull on that maybe as an experience or as someone within your network, so that it wasn't just like you going to see animals. And so I won't forget that. I think that's a good tip for people who are maybe just traveling internationally with their families and who would maybe want to count that experience out completely. There's always ways where maybe you can go spend a day and go see, go visit the embassy or and talk to foreign service officers there, or find some NGO there that you can connect with so that you can use that experience since you're already abroad, so that you can use that for yourself in the future.
All right, the next one is for Kathryn. As a computer science major pursuing a master's in cybersecurity, what would the application process look like for the Department of State abroad? And then also, and I like this question, can you give insight into the more unglamorous parts of foreign service?
Yes, great question on both fronts. So thank you for that. As a computer science major looking at a cybersecurity master's, I think you will be a sought after candidate certainly by my agency and quite a few others. So you've picked a very competitive career track, which is great. You're going to have lots of opportunities available to you. State Department is the best one, obviously. So hope you come and apply to join our team. You can, since you already, I guess, have your undergraduate degree, you can apply for our positions now because that bachelor's degree is your credential for an information technology career. That's good news because our hiring process is probably the first unglamorous part of working for the Department of State. It takes a while. We comprehensively assess all of our candidates. There's a security clearance component, which takes time. And so if you go ahead and apply now, it may be that the timing works out perfectly for you when you complete your master's degree. We can never say with certainty how long it takes any individual candidate to be hired, but typically it's between sort of 12 and 18 months to be brought on board from the day you apply till the day you start on payroll. That's a long time. I can tell you the career is worth it, but it does not hurt to start early. And those IT positions you can apply today through careers.state.gov. Unglamorous parts of the Foreign Service. So we are worldwide available, which means that we agree to serve where the department needs us. Now, that doesn't work the way it works for the military. We don't deploy people. You have a big say in where you go, but the expectation is that you will serve all around the world in all different types of assignments. So I have served in places that are really comfortable to live. I've served twice in Germany. I've served in the UK, and I've served in places that have power outages every day for 6 hours, or the water will go off, or there are all kinds of little parasites swimming around everywhere you go. I've served in some of those countries, and that's part of our experience. Now, the State Department does recognize those challenges and mitigates them. So if you're in a place where water isn't potable from the tap, we will give you a house that has a distiller in it, things like that. We take good care of our people, but you've got to have that resilience and that flexibility and that kind of go out and conquer the world kind of sense of adventure, because sometimes things are not like they are at home. In fact, very often they're not like they are at home, and you've got to lean into that and really embrace some of the differences in living that you experience overseas. I would also say that there are, we serve in uncertain times. And so we spend a lot of time in the Department of State thinking about security, and that's something that you just need to be clear-eyed about if you come into a diplomatic career. I've served in some of our highest threat assignments. I spent a year in Islamabad where I didn't travel anywhere. It wasn't a fully armored vehicle for a year. I have done all kinds of training that the State Department requires for all employees to, understand what a large explosion will sound like and how to appropriately respond to, those kinds of security threats. There are parts of the world where there's really rampant petty crime, and you've just got to be streetwise to those kinds of things. The State Department is not necessarily as an agency a target, but when people around the world are unhappy with the U.S. government and what we're doing, they turn to embassies to show that displeasure, and they will protest outside of your office, and that can create some very uncertain circumstances. So you have to be aware that those kinds of things are out there, but then on the flip side of that, you have those days where you change people's lives for the better in all kinds of ways. And that's a whole other conversation that we can schedule. I can go on for days and days and days about the rewarding aspects of my work, but it definitely is not all cocktail parties. Thank you for that question.
All right, there have been some really fantastic questions. I know there are more, but I also have to be mindful of the time. So I'm going to ask one final question to each panelist, and I believe all the panelists are willing to answer any questions that they were not able to answer tonight via email or by phone. So we can certainly share that contact information with you guys if it hasn't already been. So my apologies that I couldn't get through to them all. So one final question to you panelists, and thank you so much for your time this evening. If you could just share one of your favorite countries that you've worked in and why.
I can go first. So living in Cambodia, I think that was definitely my favorite. And I think it's because the culture is so warming and they just have the biggest hearts. And I know that's a broad generalization and there's lots of petty crime in Phnom Penh. But really, I met strangers who were totally willing to take me into their home and give me a meal. And I think that is very unique to Cambodia and maybe to Southeast Asia. But I think that's what made it a fantastic experience.
I can go next. I'd probably pick Holland. I think the Dutch are just really amazing people, a very interesting culture. From my perspective, a very interesting blend even between Europe and some US influence. Was a fun time to live there and enjoyed every bit of it. That's my pick.
I'll go next. I have two. but I'll be brief. So the first one is Belize. Belize was my second foreign service assignment and a really weird place to work. Lots of Americans come and go through Belize, but like 99.9% of them are on vacation. And so being down there as the political officer and consular officer at the embassy was just a really kind of interesting way to experience a place that most Americans don't get to see, a very behind the scenes look and a really fantastic, interesting country with a lot going on. And then I think a lot like Whitney, I loved my experiences in Southeast Asia. I didn't get a chance to serve in Cambodia, but I did spend 3 years in Malaysia and 3 years in Indonesia, and it's just a really remarkable part of the world. There is an amazing diversity of culture in both of those countries. Everything from the pure idea of culture, traditional dance, lots of different languages, to that sort of warm hospitality, and I loved all 6 years in Southeast Asia. Great.
I'm also going to make a plug for Southeast Asia. I lived in Cambodia as well. I lived in a village, so a really rural area. I lived with a host family, and the people that I lived with, my host family, I still keep in touch with them. I've gone back several times. They treated me like a son for the 2 years that I was there. And they like Whitney said, they were so welcoming. It makes me kind of emotional thinking about being there and experiencing Cambodian culture and all the beauty of it. It's a slower pace of life out in the village, and it was just really, really. I felt like in Department of State, they're the ambassadors, but I felt like out there in the rice paddy, I was pretty much the only person out there that was representing the United States, and it was really special. So I would say Cambodia as well. It's just an amazing country, amazing people.
Thank you all so much, all four of you, for providing such good insight this evening. I wanted to just quickly point out, I saw that Kathryn put a tiny URL in the chat box, and that is a way to connect with her. If you're interested in chatting with Kathryn in more detail about the State Department and the opportunities available to you, make sure to take down that link. It's in the chat box, and she sent it to everyone. And at this point in time, I'm going to pass it over to Joe, and he's going to go ahead and conclude the evening for us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for attending tonight, and thank you to our panelists. They were wonderful. And also to Rachel as the moderator, and Patrick Madsen earlier with his workshop. A couple of announcements. Again, we will be sending out a survey evaluation tomorrow to all the registrants, so please fill that out for us. And also, there will be a Foreign Service Officer workshop on May 18th for the World Affairs Council, and I think, Kathryn, you might be part of that again. And so...
Yeah, I'm going to give you guys all the secrets on how to pass the Foreign Service Officer test.
All right, and we will hopefully be able to send you information on that workshop and registration information via email as well, since you registered with us. So thank you all again. Wonderful that the technology did not go wrong on us, and we really appreciate our panelists tonight and Patrick for his workshop. Thank you again, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.